Welcome to the very best part of my broadcast week. I'm Major Garrett. This is going to be kind of a different show, ladies and gentlemen. You know, we talk about politics, policy, pop culture here. We're going to do a little bit of politics, a teeny bit of news, and then we're going to talk about pain. Real pain. Not imaginary pain, but real pain that can change someone's life, can make them uncertain about not just their future, but the next day or the actual day they're living. So get ready for that. Our guest is Adam Smith. He is the ranking Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee, elected to Congress 1996, long-serving member of the House, significant member of the House Democratic Caucus. Adam, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us. We're in his office, Rayburn House Office Building, 2264. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
So we're going to get to the pain part because Adam has written a book called Lost and Broken. I promise you we'll get to that, but there's some news items I want to run by you first. As you well know, the Speaker of the House yesterday announced the intention of House Republican majority to launch an impeachment inquiry of President Biden. Your reaction?
I think it's just a ridiculous step. And the thing is, we can go ahead and quote Kevin McCarthy to know how ridiculous a step it is. I mean, 2 weeks ago, he said impeachment is an incredibly important step, one not to be taken lightly, one he said the Republican conference would not take lightly, that they would require a vote on the House floor.
A vote to authorize.
Correct. Sorry. And yeah, stepwise, this is not impeachment per se. This is just we believe there is enough evidence to go forward with a formal inquiry. And so the appropriate committees do that inquiry. And typically that is done with a full House vote. But Speaker McCarthy has a problem. He doesn't have the votes for the impeachment inquiry for the very good reason that there's really no evidence that President Biden is worthy of impeachment. But faced with that, Kevin McCarthy did exactly what he said he wouldn't do 2 weeks ago. One person decided to launch an inquiry. Meanwhile, we have all kinds of problems facing this country. We have, healthcare, the economy, inflation. We need to pass appropriations bills.
Keep the government open.
Yes.
We'll get to that in a second.
Yes, and my reaction is this is just another example of just how extreme and partisan this Republican majority is.
Do you think there has been any evidence produced at all that suggests corruption linking Hunter Biden and the President of the United States?
No. I mean, they've had a couple of people who have said they believe that it happened, and then they've investigated at incredible length, and they've found no evidence whatsoever to back
to tie
that
the
up.
two together.
Right. I mean, look, money doesn't just disappear in the modern world. If Joe Biden, as vice president or at any point in his career, had been given the amount of money that they're claiming he had been given,
$5 million, $20 million,
right,
the figure tends to vacillate.
It didn't just disappear. It would be somewhere. They haven't found it because it didn't happen.
They say it's shell companies, hard to find.
Right. Yeah, no, apparently. You
don't buy that?
No, I don't. I mean, look, there's an incredibly complicated relationship between Joe Biden and his son Hunter. But after
a difficult one, let's be candid.
Absolutely. But after a very thorough investigation, it's 100% clear that no part of that relationship has led to any money winding up in Joe Biden's pocket. That is absolutely obvious at this point. So this impeachment inquiry is simply Kevin McCarthy once again trying to appease the extreme right-wing MAGA Republicans in his caucus.
Do you think there will be a government shutdown later this fall?
Yes, I do. I could well be wrong about that. But going back to that, issue of the extreme right wing of the Republican Party, they are insisting on a lot of things in order to vote to keep the government open. And look, we have the votes on the House floor. There are enough Republicans and enough Democrats to pass a continuing resolution and to get past that process. But again, Kevin McCarthy won't bring that up unless the Freedom Caucus says yes. So he's letting that small group
very, very conservative MAGA-influenced House Republicans.
Right. And then if we can get...
who talk openly now about vacating the chair, ousting him as Speaker if they don't get their way.
Yeah, in fact, Congressman Gates yesterday, as you know, took to the House floor and said, I love the way you put it, I'll say this for Matt. He's smart and intelligent and very clever in the way he speaks. He said, Kevin McCarthy is out of compliance with the agreement he made to be speaker, and therefore I guess Matt is making himself Kevin's boss and saying, you're fired.
Yeah, in effect, he said, we'll start every day of the House with the pledge, the prayer, and a motion to vacate if I don't get my way.
Yes. Yeah. Now, look, and that's one of the central problems here, getting sort of more big picture. I worry that, the right wing of the Republican Party no longer believes in democracy. They believe in getting their way. And no matter what, if they don't get their way, they will destroy whatever they have to destroy to show people that they're not happy about it. We've got, Senator Tuberville, holding up the entire U.S. military because he doesn't like the travel policy. Well, my suggestion for Senator Tuberville, Joe Biden's president. He won the election. He's in that position. If you don't like his policy, go to work on getting him unelected next year. Support your candidate. But don't impede the ability of the United States military to do its job because you don't like that result.
Since you mentioned that, Adam, let's talk about that. Well, the central issue, just so my listeners and viewers can be caught up very quickly, is there's a confirmation process for a great number of senior Pentagon leaders. Tuberville has blocked that.
Yeah, we're talking universally hundreds at this point.
Yes, universally, over a travel policy related to abortion access. Correct. Meaning if you're stationed in a state that has banned it, you can, with Pentagon approval, fly to a place to obtain those services. Correct. And Tuberville doesn't like that.
No. And keep in mind that the government's not paying for any reproductive care services. They're not paying for abortions. They're merely allowing a person in the military to travel from one place to another. And look, you can debate that policy. Personally, I think having access to reproductive health care is enormously important for women and will impact whether or not we're able to recruit and retain the women, and for that matter, the families we need to serve in the military. But you can have that debate, but you don't have to shut down the United States military because you didn't get your way.
And what are the consequences of not having these flag officers confirmed at the Senate level and these other leaders?
They don't have the authority that they should in their positions. We're talking chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I think two of the other Joint Chiefs from, I'm going to get this wrong, Army and I think Navy. So they no longer have the full authority of their position. Same is true with combatant commanders and generals in command posts all over the place. They can be acting in that position, but they can't have the authority. And in some cases, you can't move one from one place to another if they're not confirmed because you're vacating another job. And this impacts families as well. They don't know where they're going to be and what job they're going to have.
How does this get resolved?
That's a tough question because at the end of the day, one big problem here is the Senate. And the idea that one senator can hold up absolutely everything. I've always described the Senate as the most undemocratic democratic body, I think, in the world. So looking at reforming those rules so that one senator doesn't have this kind of power would be enormously important. But pressure is building. I mean, Mike McCall is the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He has called out Senator Tuberville for undermining the national security of this country. And look, I know Mike fairly well. He's a pretty solidly conservative Republican. So I think the pressure is building, and hopefully he will relent.
I want to carry this conversation over into segment 2. What are your thoughts about the summer offensive in Ukraine and the prospects for the next few months in that brutal and bloody conflict?
Yeah, no, it's an incredibly difficult situation. And what we need to get to is we need to get to a peaceful resolution. But what I want people to understand, the only way to get to a peaceful resolution is to convince Putin that he has been stopped. As long as he thinks that his maximalist goals of basically taking over Ukraine are still on the table, he's going to keep fighting, which is why the counteroffensive is so important, to blunt the attack from Russia, number one, and to retake territory. And in recent weeks, that has actually been going better than most people realize. The Ukrainians are beginning to retake territory. Where that goes, I'm not sure.
Let me stop you right there, Adam Smith. We're in his office in the Rayburn House office building. We'll continue the conversation on Ukraine and Taiwan and China. Then we will get to the pain. I know that's not much of a grabber, but we're going to get to the pain, I promise. Segment 2 of the Takeout coming your way in just 1 second.
We can peacefully coexist. We can compete economically. But China's goals right now are to upend the international order.
Welcome back to the Takeout. A special hello to our good friends at Cairo, long been members of the Takeout Radio Network. Good to be with you. Thanks for supporting us. Adam Smith is our special guest, Ranking Democrat, House Armed Services Committee. Anything else you want to say about Ukraine? And there's a request from the president for more assistance, and that has divided Republicans. Your thoughts?
That's where I was headed. I mean, we need to pass that supplemental appropriations bill to continue to support Ukraine at this point. The counteroffensive is ongoing, and again, I'll make the argument, if Ukraine is able to retake territory, that puts us in the best position to get to peace. If we pull the rug out from under them right now, Putin will keep fighting. He will push back on the counteroffensive and continue his quest of getting all the way to Kyiv. It will lengthen the war if we don't support the appropriations bills to help Ukraine continue to fight. And by the way, a chunk of that money goes to humanitarian assistance. It isn't even just military. The humanitarian catastrophe in Ukraine has been enormous.
Your thoughts on China, Taiwan, the president's trip there to G20 on his way back? He said he doesn't want to contain China. He just wants to make sure the world understands and China understands where things stand.
Yeah, I think crucial trip, incredibly successful, because the most important thing we can do is build partnerships and alliances in the region. This isn't just about the U.S. and China. This is about certainly the Asian region, but also the globe and China's role in it. We need to build partnerships to deal with the threat that China poses. And look, the world is big enough for the U.S. and China. We can peacefully coexist. We can compete economically. But China's goals right now are to upend the international order, to break through the rules-based system, particularly on sovereignty. They claim territory in over a half dozen different other countries, and they are aggressively pursuing those claims against Vietnam and the Philippines and Japan. It's not just Taiwan. They claim territory in India. Heck, they claim territory in Russia, which is an interesting little conversation, and they don't seem inclined to pay attention to international rules.
They dredge up things in the ocean and create territory.
Exactly, and they're violating fishing rights all over the world. I mean, even in South America, they're overfishing in areas that belong to other countries, and they're violating all kinds of rules. So I disagree with President Biden on one thing. We are. On a certain point, we're trying to contain that, all right? We're not trying to contain China's ability to grow and compete, to grow their economy, to win contracts, to be engaged, but we are trying to contain their ability to grab territory and violate rules.
And where possible, push it back, right?
Correct.
I mean, that is a fact.
Yes.
Even though he doesn't want to put it in that many words.
Yeah.
Thoughts about any linkage in the big picture, Ukraine and Taiwan?
Well, I think the linkage is Russia and China. Well, there's two big linkages. Number one, if Russia is able to simply grab territory because they want it, it makes it a lot easier for China to do that as well, or to continue to do that as they've tried to do elsewhere in the world. It sort of breaks that international norm. Second, China and Russia, and also Iran and North Korea, have a central goal of sort of breaking the international world order. Because they believe it's not theirs. It's not in their bed. They want to play by their own set of rules, not by a set of rules that was set up post-World War II. And if Russia can smash sovereignty in Ukraine, that's a big step towards meeting the goals not just of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea as well, of introducing a new measure of chaos into the globe.
How destabilizing, if at all, is this meeting between Kim Jong-un and Putin?
It's potentially very destabilizing, and it makes the point that it's all part of an alliance. Let me just say, by the way, I do not say all of that to say that the rules-based international order that has been set up post-World War II, primarily by the United States, has been perfect. No, we need to do a better job of having conversations with other countries throughout the world, the non-aligned countries, India, Brazil, South Africa, and others, about what's wrong with the international system. What can we do differently to make sure that it's more fair, that it gives some of the developing countries a better shot? We could have that conversation, but that's not what China and Russia want to do. They want to introduce basically rule by might, autocracy, not an international order. And that's what we must stand up against.
So, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who've watched this entire conversation reasonably would tell yourself, what are you talking about, Major? This pain thing, what are you talking about? Adam Smith is clearly together, articulate, smart, knows all this stuff, looks perfectly relaxed, comfortable. You tell them what it's about.
Yeah, no, I went through a significant battle with debilitating anxiety and chronic pain, and I wrote a book about it. And easiest way to think about it is I start the book in 2016, which was after my third hip surgery. I have 2 artificial hips now. I had one other hip surgery that didn't. Well, none of them worked that well. And so by 2016, a couple months after that third hip surgery, I was in massive amounts of pain. I was on a whole bunch of different drugs. The anxiety was worse than ever. I was on anti-anxiety meds as well as anti-pain meds. And I just wasn't getting any better. And so the story I tell is how did I get to that point? And then crucially, how did I get out of it?
You open the book with a very dramatic reference to wondering if you could get out of bed.
Yeah. Every day in that point, I was, I woke up in utter fear. And number one, I knew I had to get out of bed because if I didn't, I was going to waste away lying there. But I was in pain. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I could do. I have a schedule, but it's like, can I do this? Can I not do that? And then the decisions, what treatment do I pursue? Do I stick with the psychiatrist I'm seeing right now? Do I stick with this physical therapy plan, that physical therapy plan? How much medication do I take? Knowing or feeling I had to get off of it at some point. So all of those decisions went into every single day. And it started, in 2013 is when my anxiety hit. 2014 is when the pain hit, and it took me 6 years to get out of it. Now, before 2013, I had bouts of anxiety and a bout of depression, and I'd been in pain in one way or another since I had a knee surgery when I was 16 years old. But that was all manageable, basically, except for a couple of points. But by 2013, it wasn't manageable, and I didn't know how to get out of it.
In your own words, define the anxiety you suffered.
Absolutely. It's funny. It hit me suddenly. Like in 2005, I had the bout of anxiety, which I got over in like 5 or 6 months, never really understanding it. And then it came back in 2013. But what happens is constant existential fear, okay, with no specific reason. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, I just went and saw the doctor and he saw something on a scan, or I'm losing my job, or one of my children is sick. It was just, I just felt this sense of existential fear, which meant that I couldn't sleep, constantly heart going a million miles an hour, not in my stomach. I had trouble eating, forcing myself to eat, and I couldn't clearly identify what was I afraid of. This is sort of, and that's what I try to explain. There's a difference between the normal stresses and strains and ups and downs of life, which, by the way, are mental health problems as well, that we all need to think about how better to manage, and what is sort of clinical anxiety or clinical depression, where it hits you in a way that you have no control over it whatsoever, and it won't go away. Day after day after day, I felt that way.
You felt this surging in your heart rate. You felt tingling. You felt a sense of
not in my
dread.
Stomach. Yeah.
But non-specific dread. You couldn't label it. You couldn't point to something.
The analogy I drew is it was sort of like every day I was, a homicidal maniac was running at me with a machete. That's sort of how I felt constantly, although I could not identify the specific homicidal maniac in this case. So,
right.
And I did get treatment, and that's the point. And there is a logical explanation for why I felt that way. But it took me a very long time and a whole series of therapists to get to those answers.
And for someone hearing your voice and wondering what's been going on with them, what's the most important thing you would tell them?
Well, if talking about an individual is, understand that you need to work on your mental health, okay? One of my big problems early on when this happened is I never thought it possible that I would have a mental health problem. I thought of mental health as a very simple thing. There's this line, okay? On one side of it, you're normal. On the other side of it, you're crazy. I was normal, so therefore I didn't have to worry about crazy.
Therefore, you couldn't be crazy.
Exactly.
That's the voice of Adam Smith.
Yeah.
I hate to break into it right
sure.
now because we're on a roll, but we're going to get back to that. Segment 3 of the Takeout in just 1 second.
The most important thing is to think of your mental health in the same way you think of your physical health, as something that you need to work on.
Welcome back to the Takeout. Adam Smith is our special guest. That line between normal and crazy.
Yeah. No,
Is it a real thing?
No.
But it's something we all, or many of us,
Yeah.
imagine in our mind.
And it's getting better. The stigma against mental health is coming down a little bit. More people are talking about it. But growing up, when you have something physical wrong with you, if you get a cold, you're like, okay, do I need to treat it? You think about it. I had knee problems, as I mentioned earlier when I was a kid. So you'd go to a therapist. But if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling stressed, well, that's just life. Okay, you just got to figure out how to get through it. And I think what the most important thing is to think of your mental health in the same way you think of your physical health, as something that you need to work on. You need prevention. You need to treat it when it comes up. And then, and this is not a short answer, so I'll try to give it quickly, the baselines of mental health. When I first started going through this, every therapist I went to wanted to put me through cognitive behavioral therapy, which is fine, okay? Cognitive behavioral therapy basically is to think about what you're anxious about, all right? Okay, you're anxious, why? All right, let's name it as the nomenclature goes. Write down what you're anxious about. So that's number one, is to really think through what you're anxious about. And then number two is, what can you do about that? And there are two basic things you can do about it. Number one, don't catastrophize. Anytime, if you hear anyone use the word catastrophize, you know that they've been in therapy, or they've talked about it at any rate, which is you exaggerate things. Mm-hmm. It's like, I've got a headache. Oh my gosh, I've got a brain tumor. Or my boss looked at me funny. My career's over. All right. And there's a tendency to do that. So you can talk.
Imagine the worst.
Right. Exactly.
Project the worst.
Exactly. So let's talk through how you can better process it. And then the second thing you can do is, if there's something you're anxious about, are there things you can do in your life to reduce it? Let's say that, you're stressed out at work. Okay. Well, why? Can you talk to your boss maybe about your workload? Can you talk to a coworker? Do you want a different career? So let's walk through strategies. And that's all very well and good. But there are two baselines of mental health. And if those baselines aren't there, cognitive behavioral therapy is just going to irritate the hell out of you. Okay? Because when they would ask me, well, what are you anxious about? I don't know. That's the point. Okay? And once you get to the point where cognitive behavioral therapy is, well, what you really need to do is you need to be less anxious about it. Really?
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks for that.
It never occurred to me. So the two baselines are, number one, and this is what I did not understand, you have to have a sense of your own self-worth, and you might not. Okay, that sounds obvious, but in my case, I really didn't believe that I was inherently worthy of love, to be sort of Buddhist and cliche about it. I was anxious and worried about it because I didn't get that basic stability as a child. I was adopted, and there's a long version of the story. So for me, every day was a test. Am I worthy? I've got to succeed. I got to prove it. Because when my therapist asked me, he told me basically that I didn't have a sense of self-worth. And I argued with him, and he said, well, why do you think you have a sense of self-worth? And I made the argument. I'm good at my job. I'm a good father. I'm a good husband. Everything. Right. And he said, so that's where you think you get your self-worth from? And I was like, well, duh, of course. Right. It's not. It's inherent. You have to believe that whether you screw up or not, you are worthy, which is not to say that what you do in life isn't important, but it shouldn't get to your core sense of self-worth. That's number one. Number two is, are there traumas, and I'll explain that in a moment, in your life that you haven't properly dealt with? And this is a huge thing right now on PTSD, for instance. If you have had some trauma in your life at any point in your life that you haven't properly processed, you are suppressing it. And that's what's causing your anxiety, but your mind is saying, we're not going there.
Right.
We're not letting you think about it.
Right.
So you have to go through therapy to bring it up, deal with it, and let your mind sort of rewire. If you don't have those two, if you got two of those things going on, cognitive behavioral therapy is just going to send you around in a circle.
Right.
And that's what it took me a long time to understand.
And for several people who have gone through therapy, myself included, when you talk about things that are traumatic in your life and you are afraid to go back to them, the bad thing has already happened.
Yeah.
And that's the thing you have to cross over. The bad thing has already happened. What you're trying to do is work through it, absorb it, come to terms with it, and move on.
Yeah.
But the bad thing's already happened.
And I think
reaching back to it is not going to make it any worse. It's already bad.
Right. It's going to scare you in the short term, but it's going to make things better. And I think the other thing about trauma that really is worth noting, a lot of the focus on trauma is bad things that have been done to you. I think that's true. A situation where, obviously abuse, or if you grew up in an unstable home with addicted parents or a foster home or something, but it can be smaller than that.
Or it can be things that you did that were wrong that you feel guilty about.
Exactly.
And haven't touched on.
And that was a big part of it for me. I had really a problematic upbringing with my family. I'm going to get into the details here. Just have to say, like I said, I was adopted. My mother had a little bit of a depression problem. My father had a little bit of an anxiety problem. I had a sibling who went off the rails, and caused all kinds of disruption in the family. There was a high level of uncertainty. But for me, part of me was angry, particularly when I found out I was adopted. It's like my biological parents put me into this situation. Okay. Right. I'm like, and I would spend a lot of time thinking about what my life could have been if I hadn't had those problems. But the other huge part of it, which I really didn't deal with, was I felt guilty about it because I hadn't done much to really help out in my view. Now, I'm 12, 13, 15 years old, but still, particularly given how I viewed myself, as a member of Congress, my whole life, not my whole life, but since I became an adult anyway, I have sought out positions of responsibility. I have thought of myself as a person who solves problems, who helps other people, who gets things done. Okay.
And is held accountable in a political sphere for whether you do that or not.
Exactly. And yet, in my childhood, I didn't do anything. Okay.
And there was guilt.
Yeah. And so I had to deal with that.
Back to that time when you wondered if you could get out of bed, how much of that was about pain and how much of that was about anxiety?
It was primarily anxiety was the most important part, because the fear was what was driving it. What really, I think, threw me more than anything, I've had problems and challenges in my life, but I think through them. I'm an incredibly logical person. I have a process. I do to-do lists all day long. I got a stack of notebooks over here with all that stuff. And the fear and the anxiety paralyzed me. I couldn't think clearly. I had no plan. I was lurching from idea to idea without being able to organize it. So the anxiety really made it impossible to deal with made it very difficult to deal with any of it. So I would say that was the primary problem.
How dark did it get for you?
Well, the best way I can describe it is, and this is a point that my therapist and I went over when I tried to argue that I had a sense of self-worth. I woke up every single morning and the first thing I said was, I hate myself. That's the way I felt, because I was not where I wanted to be. I wasn't doing what I needed to do. And I had this constant sense of just self-loathing that, how could I have screwed this up?
Did you ever think about ending your own life?
No, I'm afraid of death. So that's an illogical approach there.
Doesn't work. Doesn't connect. Okay.
Exactly. So no, I did not get to that point.
What effect did this have on your wife and two children?
It's extraordinarily difficult. I think my children in particular, it was stressful for them. It was stressful for all of them. Now, we are a very strong unit, and we have come through it. Been married for 30 years now. Children are 23 and 20, and we're very close and connected, and I've talked openly with them about all of this. I'm still trying to get my kids to read my book.
I know what that feels like.
Young people don't read books. It's not even personal. It's just they don't read books anymore. So maybe if I did a TikTok video, then I'd be in better shape. Yeah. But no, it was really difficult. And that's one other thing that I would say to anyone going through this is understand if one individual is going through this, their whole immediate world is going through it. And in many ways, it's more difficult on the family members because they don't know what's going on. They don't know what you're feeling, what you're thinking, how you're doing. So it's really hard.
It's hard to articulate it to yourself. It's hard to articulate it to your therapist. It's hard to articulate it to your family.
Yes. Yeah. So, I was incredibly blessed. I have a very supportive family and also a lot of, very supportive friends and others. So
that's the voice of Adam Smith. His book is Lost and Broken. There's a significant part of the book that deals with navigation, how to try to find your way through that. We're going to talk about that next. Stay tuned for the Takeout segment 4.
I stand by the statement that we way overprescribe pain medication and antidepressants,
Why?
anti-anxiety, because it's easy.
Welcome back. My posture properly adjusted. Thank you, Arden Fari. Adam Smith is our special guest. Lost and Broken is the book. We've talked at some length about pain, anxiety. Let's go through the navigation process. You were prescribed lots of medicines. How helpful were they?
Yeah, ultimately they weren't very helpful at
Were not.
all. Yeah. So, but I think the navigation process starts with I had problems both physically and mentally that I had no idea how to deal with. So I dove into the healthcare system to try and find people who did know how to deal with them.
You're someone, let's be candid, whose phone calls can and will be returned.
Absolutely.
You are advantaged in that space.
Yes.
Anyone in Seattle, or anywhere across the country for that matter, who gets a call from Adam Smith is going to return that call.
Yeah.
Even with that advantage, it was a maze.
Yeah. No, and I document this in the book,
do.
but I literally saw over 100 different providers. Most of that was on the physical side because I was cycling through physical therapists and massage therapists and chiropractors and personal trainers, desperately trying to figure out how my body worked. But I also saw about a dozen different psychologists or psychiatrists, and it is very difficult. Number one, I had to worry about, because while I can see people, I don't have a lot of money. So if it wasn't covered by insurance, I had to think about, can I see that person? How often can I see that person? And your average person is going to have a, much bigger problem if you don't have insurance, if you can't find the providers. But once you find them, it's really important to understand the degree to which you have to take responsibility for your own healthcare solutions. I was just freaked out. And what I wanted is I wanted that person to tell me, all right, here's what's wrong with you. Here's what you need to do. Do it. You'll be fine. All right. It is a more interactive process than that. You're going to have to communicate, and you're going to have to try and find a provider that you can communicate with, which is not easy.
No, and
Right.
I think as anyone who's been through this process also knows, you need an advocate, because sometimes if you're wounded, you can't be the aggressive advocate. You talk about your wife being someone who was particularly well oriented toward that sort of fastidious work.
Yeah.
And chased everything down and made the 10th phone call and asked the 15th question. If you don't have that advocate, you're in not a world of hurt, but it's a more difficult scenario.
It's much harder. As far as the medication is concerned, that factors into this, because the medication is, as they say in the Army, it's the easy button. Okay. Whether you're talking about pain or mental illness, all right, we could talk about this for a while and try to figure it out, but that's going to take time. Here, take this pill. Okay. And I want to be clear on something. I understand that medication is probably important for a lot of people. That said,
there were times you write about in the book where it did provide immediate relief that you could notice.
Yes, absolutely.
But it wasn't sustainable.
Exactly. But I stand by the statement that we way overprescribe pain medication and antidepressants,
Why?
anti-anxiety, because it's easy. It's easy.
And it's paid for.
Yeah, and it's paid for, yes. But the other part of it is, certainly drug companies push this stuff aggressively and not always in a responsible way, in my view. Doctors do it because, again, it's easy. But patients also, we want the easy answer, okay? Ultimately, what got me better was 3.5 years worth of psychotherapy and a lot of deep thinking that wasn't easy. And on the physical side, I found a muscle activation therapist who actually understood how your muscles work. But it took me a year, and I still work out a lot. It was hard, all right? And, a lot of people don't want to do hard work. So the drug, again, is the easy approach. But particularly, and there's a lot of talk about the opioid crisis, and I think people have understood that. But benzodiazepines are a huge problem. That's anti-anxiety medication.
Okay.
That's Xanax, in my case, clonazepam. We were talking earlier. I used to pronounce it clonazepam until I did the audio version of my book, and they explained to me that it was pronounced differently. But anyway, the thing about benzos that is really problematic is just like the pain medication.
That's not a fire alarm, ladies and gentlemen, by the way. That's just
the house
calling
coming into
itself.
session.
Exactly.
Or getting ready to come into session,
Exactly.
actually. But what it does is it does make you relax. That first time in 2005, the first time that anxiety hit me and I didn't know what to do about it, I was prescribed that in like the first few days before I saw my psychiatrist. And you take one of those pills the first time, it's unbelievable. I mean, I'd gone like a week at that point of constant anxiety. I took
Unable to sleep, eat, function.
Right. I took a pill. 45 minutes later, it was like nothing ever happened. I was back to complete normalcy. But you build up tolerance, first of all. And second of all, it only masks what's really causing the anxiety, which is those underlying issues that I talked about earlier. And then the other thing is once you get on this stuff, getting off of it is not fun. I got off of benzos, I don't know, 5 or 6 times, and then various opioids probably at least that often. It's not easy.
What happens?
Well, on the benzos, you're just really anxious. Okay, there's no other sort of real side effect there. It's just that the anxiety gets cranked up to a higher level. On opioids, there's a little bit of that, and then also you have typically diarrhea, and the pain will spike, the anxiety will spike. It's difficult, and I wasn't taking as much as a lot of people I read about. I forget the milligrams now, that it's been a while. But it's a challenge. So I think we need to be real careful about passing out antidepressants and anxiety medication. I also tried Celexa, which is like a Prozac sort of thing. That didn't do anything for me except really freak me out. So
these are very delicate knobs, and we should be careful about how we turn them up, because it's hard to turn them down.
That's actually a good way of putting it. When I finally decided that I was completely done with antidepressants, SSRIs, as I was cycling through the Celexa, well, maybe if you up the dose. And so I said, well, how does this stuff even work? And they said, well, you've got the serotonin levels in your brain. And if you're depressed or anxious, the serotonin levels are off. And what this medication does is it resets those. And I said, well, how can it be both an antidepressant and an anti-anxiety medication? I said, well, it can be initially activating and it takes a while to even out. And the guy described it to me. Well, think of it this way. It's kind of like, you're trying to fill up the tank in your car by running back and forth past the gas tank and throwing a bucket of gasoline at it. Yeah. And I'm like, and we'd want to do that with my brain because... I'm not taking a shot in the dark. Like, we put some in, maybe it goes up a little high, maybe it goes up a little low, and then eventually it evens out. Yeah. Again, this is my caveat. There are many people that I've spoken to who have taken antidepressants that said it's worked brilliantly and it's been great for them, and that's fine. But it's not the panacea that you might think it would be.
Right. How are you now? In 30 seconds.
I'm outstanding. It's a long story, but I understand my brain. I understand my body. I got people who help me get there. And I'm as healthy, both mentally and physically, as I've probably been since I was 12 years old.
How's that feel?
Oh, my gosh. As I said, it's in my book, it's like banging your head against the wall. It feels so good when you stop. And it also gives me perspective.
Perspective and stopping, those things matter. Adam Smith has been our special guest. Stay tuned for the Takeout Outtake Especial. I'm Major Garrett. We'll see you next week.
Wedding Crashers, Old School, and actually one of my favorite movies that isn't as well known is Grosse Pointe Blank.
Welcome to your Takeout Outtake Especial. I'm Major Garrett. We are in Rayburn House Office Building 2264. That's because we are talking to its occupant, Adam Smith, Democrat from Washington, 9th District, ranking Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. So this is the fun and games part of the program.
Okay.
And I want to give you lots of time to answer our 3 threshold questions because our audience loves the answers. So take these in whichever order you prefer. Most influential book in your life and why? all-time favorite movie. And if you're flying back to your home district, I mean, that's a 5-hour flight at least, and you're really going to enjoy some music. I mean, really enjoy it. What kind of music, artist, or genre is that most likely to be?
The first one's the easiest question to answer. My favorite book is Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which I've now read 3 times. I read it when I was 19 years old in college, right after my father had passed away. Had a profound impact on me, and then
Why?
a couple other times. It just sort of explained the world in a way that made sense to me. And getting into what Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance does is sort of hard, but it basically answers the question as to whether or not there is any objective truth in the world and what subjectivity has to do with that, and introduces the concept of quality, that there is something in between subjectivity and objectivity that just is. And it walks through a whole explanation for how to live. It's just a fascinating book. The second question, my all-time favorite movie is, it's difficult because it's
hard, yeah.
Well, I have recency bias.
Of course, most of us do.
Because at the moment, my all-time favorite movie is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I just thought it was brilliantly laid out, very funny, and very clever. If I was going for something that had, profound impact on my life, gosh, that would be a tougher question. I don't have one, so I'll stick with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Okay, we'll take that as an answer. But is there a movie that if you are scrolling, you will always stop no matter where it is in the movie? Third, halfway through?
Absolutely. In fact, my wife and I are opposites in this regard. I'm easily intrigued. Okay, if I see some, even if it's like a bad movie, it's like, I want to see where it's going.
Right. Okay.
But Wedding Crashers, Old School, and actually one of my favorite movies that isn't as well known is Grosse Point Blank.
Oh yes, I know that movie. It's a great one.
Just very clever. But I also, on the more serious side, I've watched Patton several times. And there's a lot of lines in there that I use frequently. So yes, there are a lot of movies.
Excellent.
That will
Music.
fit that mode. Music, I'm really more eclectic, and I don't listen to music that much, mainly because I'm busy, and when I'm not busy, like if I'm exercising, when I walk or work out, I don't listen to anything. I think so. It's sort of my time to sort of play it out. But as far as I'm kind of an old-time rock and roll guy. That's what Rolling Stones, Beatles, Kinks back in the day. So rock and roll would be my go-to genre. But also, I got to give a special shout out to Taylor Swift, who
doesn't?
Who my daughter got me into. My daughter went to one of the Eras tour in Seattle. Religious experience in her view, and I think Taylor Swift is unbelievably talented.
We'll probably see you at the movie theater when the movie comes
Yeah,
out.
that's true. Yeah, exactly.
Do you meditate?
Meditation, key thing, what meditation helps you with, it's part of cognitive behavioral therapy. What meditation teaches you is it's okay to let things go. And that's what I didn't understand. I tried to meditate forever, and it just drove me insane. I kept saying I'm stressed out because I can't find time to meditate. And then when I would meditate, I was like, okay, the idea is you're supposed to not think, oh, damn, I screwed up. No, what meditation teaches you is just notice what's going on around you. Don't react to it, all right? If a thought enters your head, notice it, move on. So what I do now is when I'm walking or brushing my teeth or I will take like a 2 or 3 minute period and go, okay, I'm just going to notice. I'm going to notice the sounds. I'm going to notice the smells. I'm going to notice the thoughts that come into my head and let them go. So in that sense, yes, I meditate, but I don't do the regular sort of 20-minute a day practice.
Adam Smith, it's been a pleasure.
Great. It's been an honor to talk with you. I appreciate the chance.
We'll see you next week, folks. Thanks.